I am now a experienced practitioner within the realm of psychology, and I'm coming to the conclusion that psychology itself may merely be a pseudoscience at this point. There's evidence to even back this assertion up. If you look up the replication crisis and whatnot, it is a very damning picture that it paints towards the whole industry. Now, one of the things that irks me the most and has surprised me the most is the relationship between nutrition and the bodily experience and the foods and substances you put in your body and the creation of consciousness and the mind. Now, the reason why this is so bad is because psychologists, being neurotic themselves, usually try to label and categorize problems with the mind as something to do with the brain not working properly, the machinery broken. But they don't ever take this down to a first principle and presuppose that the mind comes out of the body, and that the mind is not only a product of the brain, and what comes out of the brain is not merely a product of what happens in the skull, but the food that goes into your belly and the substances around this. To illustrate this picture most lucidly, 90% of the schizophrenics and psychotics that I've worked with have smoked cannabis, and they were triggered specifically during an episode when they are high. Their first triggering, or one of their major triggerings, happened due to being stoned. So cannabis seems to have some very strange correlation towards mass psychosis or serious psychosis episodes. Now, I can't even think of any schizophrenics or psychotics that I spoke of and that I spoke to who were not smoking weed. It was a part of their lifestyle in some type of way. I can't think of any. And I used to take the approach that weed, for example, was harmless. And I spoke to quite a lot of these people, and I was astounded to realize that the vast majority of their psychiatrists and psychologists and psychotherapists would do two things. Instead of telling them to stop smoking weed, they would either sit down with them and talk and do talk therapy, which didn't really do much, and then they would on the other hand they would prescribe them more drugs, antipsychotic meditations. But very, very few, now some did, but very, very few would sit down and analyze the person's lifestyle and habits, and specifically the nutritional and biological habits. Very, very few of them would do this. Very, very few of them would sit them down and critique their attitude towards cannabis. Very, very few of them would actually sit down and discuss their diets. For example, I would do this on them. I was often doing this during my free calls, because I'm not going to be able to work with someone who is psychotic or schizophrenic. They won't have enough money, so it's just a free advice moment for me. I just have to dump as much high effective work that I can in the 15 minutes that we would have. So I would always try to get to the jugular, and I would ask these people, what's your diet like? And the vast majority of them, they smoked a lot of weed, and they ate a lot of pizza, ate a lot of fast food, ate a lot of inflammatory foods, drank a lot of Coca-Cola, and they had a very poor general diet, were inside a lot, staring at screens a lot, not really out in the sun enough. This was the general disposition of this archetype, if you will, the psychotic, the person with a serious mental health problem. And what would happen is that they would go through this period of their life where they'd have these terrible, terrible experiences. Oftentimes they'd have a lot of stressors from social interpretations, people looking down on them, because, if you're not in a good place, people aren't really going to be too impressed with you. And then what happens is all this emotional stress builds up inside of them, alongside all this inflammation of the body due to physiological misalignment. And then what will happen is you sprinkle on top of that some psychoactive substance like cannabis. And actually, I noticed that cannabis would often trigger this. Rarely was it things like mushrooms and psychedelics. I actually noticed that didn't happen that much at all. Cannabis and speed, ironically. So really, really intense stimulants, they were way more common than, for example, psychedelics and mushrooms and whatnot. Empirical experience here, but I'm at the point with science where I'm running on empiricism more than I am listening to some of the dubious studies that come out these days. And so this is what I've noticed, is that all this stressor would build up emotionally, all this toxins would build up and inflammation in the body, and then they would have some type of psychosomatic state, and then there would be a trigger moment, and then what happens is they go on a break and they go psychotic for maybe two days or something like this, or a couple of hours even. But during that period of time when they go crazy, they would be taken and placed into an asylum. They would be taken and placed into a therapeutic ward or something like this. They would be injected into these modern safe spaces. And what happens in there, and this is the basic standard procedure, and this is understandable, they just tied them up. They tied them up. They lock them into the room and they hold them down. They give them a lot of depressant drugs or sedative drugs to calm them down as best they can, and they just basically let them work their way out of the psychosis. They let the psychosis kind of like cool down and whatnot, and it takes a while for the delusions to come back out of wherever they are and kind of soften down and quiet down, and them to come back to earth and whatnot. And then at that point, usually they sit them down and explain to them, you are now psychotic, you are now broken. You get a label placed on top of you. And then what comes alongside this with the person is a huge amount of shame, a huge amount of fear. People are going to now judge me. I'm going to forever be a psychotic. It's like I'm going to forever be a loser or something like this. It's like some type of massive dent to their social status. And then their emotions get all wrapped up in it, even worse. And then they like for extended periods of their life, often years afterwards, they're running around with this horrible feeling that the psychosis is always going to come back and get me, and I'm haunted by some type of demon, and the only way I can keep the demon away, this psychosis of mine, is that I have to keep going and doing these methods like taking these magic potions, these drugs, or going to these priestly types, these talk therapists, and exercising all the trauma out of me and all this. But no one ever stops in a sort of Nietzschean way and analyzes the physiological first principles here and talks about the principles of diet, the principles of eating cleanly, taking inflammation out of the body at its root, and taking all of this stuff, taking, for example, things like cannabis and whatnot out of the diet. Oftentimes it's not stressed enough at all. And as I said, like I've come across some who have had decent therapists who have brought this type of stuff up, but surprisingly, it's the exception, not the rule. I couldn't believe it when I found it out. Now, this becomes a very, very serious issue because it leads to looking at the entire industry as fraudulent, as incorrect, as on first principle making a mistake. And so because they're so wrong in this first principle, which is basically that from our physiology and our biology, we get our conscious mind-based experience. Because of this, that is such a damaging vision on the idea of medical drugs and, for example, talk therapy that is so unstable. It completely flips the script and makes these sort of trivial and worthless or very, very, very ineffective additions onto this foundational first principle that the whole industry has refused to look at the elephant in the room and confront the elephant in the room, it seems. Now, the more you inspect into this, the more you realize that it is the most important and biggest deal of all. You must get down to this first principle and understand that, for example, the reason why cannabis, I've looked into this, the reason why cannabis has such a effect on schizophrenia and psychosis is because cannabis seems to act upon your serotonin receptors. Your serotonin receptors are the functionary parts of your mind that create your arousal and your mood and your consciousness. Psychedelics act on serotonin. Most psychedelics are shaped like serotonin. Psilocybin, LSD, they look like serotonin. When you eat food, your gut bacteria produces 90%, 95% of your serotonin in your gut. And this is the reason why what food you eat and the cleanliness of your food dictates the state of your consciousness. Most Depressant drugs are SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They act on serotonin. They are trying to get your serotonin receptors to work better. Now, all of these naturalistic things that you look at, such as having a clean diet, a good physiology, a lifestyle side of things, are immensely important towards you getting this stuff in order. Now, I'm free to talk about this because a lot of what I'm doing, for example, in my shall we say, financial side of things, a lot of my Boyo program is geared towards taking people and teaching them the art of narration, teaching them the art of communication, because I find that when you are actually asserting yourself upon the world and asserting your communication upon the world, that is when you actually start to change your life for the benefits and for the positive and for the good. That's when you start to feel your power getting released and you're getting in more wealth and getting in more attention and influence and whatnot. And a lot of my work in psychology that I've already done, because I'm sort of disgusted, I get a bad taste in my mouth being around the industry as such, I don't really do it anymore. I am free to offer this stuff for free. So if you are going through any issue or problem in regards to your mental health, I strongly encourage you to wind back to this first principle I'm describing and go really deep in researching this. Educate yourself on nutrition. Put it into practice. Put it into practice on first principle and cut out weed, man. Just give that stuff up. I never thought I'd be that type of, prude, but yeah, it's real. And hit hard on all these type of things and assume that you're not educated and you don't know what you're talking about this. Spend a long time working on it. So I wish you as well. I will talk to you later, people. Stay juicy. Bye bye.